chapel in July.
That was not a knife. I understand it was like a Bic razor that didn't actually harm him. But he still wasn't concerned at that point in time either, and he really didn't have any concerns about his life at all as being threatened.
Okay, his stepmother said in an interview with CNN earlier, she said Jeff felt he deserved anything he got. He said after the first time he was assaulted that it was only grace that had saved his life. He had made his peace. He did not fear death because of what he had done. From your experience talking to him, did he perhaps have a death wish?
That's another thing. I don't think he had a death wish. I think he was getting as used to one can get to prison life and the prison routine and being assimilated into the population. I don't think Jeff wanted to die. I think the stories about his death wish, if he had one, had expired 2.5 years ago. He was free enough in there. Had he wanted to kill himself, he could have done it. He certainly could have had the opportunity. I don't think he wanted to die. I don't think he certainly didn't want to die in this manner, and I don't think that was anything that he was expecting. If he was, in fact, concerned about people coming on to him, that might have been a concern. It wasn't voiced to me, but I don't think he woke up every morning thinking about this could be its last.
Have you talked to the family?
Yes, I've talked to all the family.
And how are they feeling?
They're very upset. Both are crying, both are grieving, and by both I mean Sherry and Lionel and Joyce as well, his mother. I guess their only concern at this point in time is how the body gets disposed of.
Okay. Is there any concern on the part of the family and the responsibility for the prison officials?
Not that they've voiced to me right now. I don't know if that is a concern right now. It's kind of like after the fact, whether or not the prison is at fault for any negligence in failing to supervise. I don't know if that's an issue that they've gotten around to yet.
Tell us, explain the procedure, because he was under protective custody originally, and he participated in getting off that level of protective custody and mixing in with the general inmate population. How does that work?
Well, originally in the state of Wisconsin, all inmates, for whatever crime they're convicted, go to a central receiving area called Dodge Correctional for 2 months, and they're tested and determined in terms of violence where they should go. Jeff was an abnormality in that regard because he didn't go to Dodge Correctional because of his status. He went straight to Columbia Correctional, which was the maximum security prison in Wisconsin, one of them. At Dodge Correctional, they did all the at Columbia, they did all the testing, and he was in isolation pretty much for about 6 to 8 months. But the goal of the prison and the goal of him was to be assimilated into the general population. They really wanted to treat him as any other life-term inmate they had, and I think that was a proper goal, and I think Jeff wanted it that way. The only alternative was to keep him locked up in a cell all day long, and I don't think he wanted that, and I know the prison didn't want that.
Steve Eisenberg, Jeffrey Dahmer's attorney, thanks very much for your time, for joining us on the phone today. We certainly appreciate your insight into this case. Now, was it fear, revenge, or perhaps envy that brought death to Dahmer? A former FBI agent will share some of his theories with us right after this. We are talking about Jeffrey Dahmer and prison safety. Should he have been given special protection, continue to have been given special protection? To discuss that issue, former FBI agent and author of Justice is Served, Robert Ressler, joins us from our Washington bureau. Thank you for joining us. Explain why Jeffrey Dahmer in particular is considered a high-risk prisoner.
I think anytime an individual has the visibility and the notoriety, infamy, if you will, that Jeffrey Dahmer had, he's going to be a target to a certain degree in a penitentiary. You know, various notable inmates, Charles Manson, David Berkowitz, son of Sam Killer, many of these individuals have had problems in penitentiary and have been assaulted, and for various obvious reasons. It's a very good way for a nobody to become a somebody.
Is it just notoriety, or is there a particular issue in terms of prison hierarchy if you are a serial killer?
Well, that can certainly come into play. You can have the prison hierarchy. There is a lot of biases built in institutions as well. Dahmer's victims were black, and they were predominantly black and gay. You could have some, you know, some hostilities based on the fact that his victims were a certain type, and yet in many hours of conversation with Dahmer, I never really got the feeling that Dahmer really hated his victims. In fact, it was just the opposite. And then, of course, there's always a prejudice against people who victimize children, and some of Dahmer's victims were young males.
Mm-hmm. I want to introduce you and some of the members of our audience to Charles and James. Charles, you served 5 years for armed robbery. We are not, now you were not in Jeffrey Dahmer's prison, but can you give us an idea of what it's like? Kind of paint a picture for us, if you will, life behind bars.
Life behind bars. Life behind bars is simple. You're usually in an open type population. You go from a dorm. You're in a dorm such as 120 men in a dorm. They basically live together as, I would say, a family. You have to trust each other. There are people in there that will steal from you. You are usually broken down into little groups between walls, but you're in like I'd say a 600 square foot area.
What about the issue of personal safety? Did you, were you ever threatened? Were you ever beaten up?
The only threats I ever probably received were minor. I had an instance where I had 6 black individuals try to jump me when I first went in because I was what they call fresh, green. Didn't know the system because I was 17.
That's ringing a bell there, James, is it? I see, yeah?
I didn't have those type of problems. My single concern, I think, was disease, was because I had been exposed to tuberculosis and the HIV thing, and, you know, the food. And in Georgia, I think we have a safe system. I think it's we have all we need to rehabilitate. I think it's all there.
Okay, so back to you, Robert Ressler. Is, you know, Charles and James are describing an environment where they felt personally fairly safe. Are most prisons that safe, or is there a level of violence or threats in there?
Well, I've gone to many institutions in my career over the years, well over several hundred. The fact is that prisons are not safe places. Every prison I've been in, I have had a feeling that I really wanted to keep my wits about me and keep observing what's going on around me. You got to consider a prison is a place where many, many people have been collected together who have demonstrated an inability to function in normal society. And who's to say that the streets of our society are safe? It is far safer in some instances to be an inmate in an institution than it is to, say, work in a 24-hour convenience store or a fast food place where the victims of random killings have been extremely high. Violence in the workplace is a very big concern right now because of the high number of people getting killed in the workplace.
Right, I understand that. I want to introduce you to Oliver Keller. He's the past president of the American Correctional Association. We've got just a second left in this block, but I want you to tell me, why are prisons particularly dangerous places?
I think they're very dangerous places. Jails and prisons are places where people get hurt. You got to be tough to survive in prison. There are good prison administrators who do the best they can, but that FBI agent is right on target. You put someone in jail or prison, and he better be tough. Unless I mean, it's a very mean existence inside a prison.
Okay, it's a very mean existence. So how much responsibility, if you will, do we as a society have to keep people who are in prison safe? Should we make prisons perhaps more secure? One man calls it a human rights issue. Find out if you agree with him coming up next.
It was long overdue. I don't see Jeffrey Dahmer. I see the pictures of those young boys. Remember those faces. Forget about Dahmer. You had people corresponding with Dahmer. They thought he was a great guy. There was 4,000 people, I think, that had some kind of interaction with him. Listen, when he went into the prison group, he was looking for a smorgasbord.
Oh. Patrick, I understand that you disagree with Ruth.
Right. Like I said, I'm a spiritual person, and I believe in spirituality. Being a spiritual person, I mean, I just don't believe in hurting anybody, or anybody should get hurt. And if that's the case, there's people in Washington that's doing the same thing, but on paper.
Okay, so Ruth, what do you have to say to Patrick?
Listen, hindsight has 20/20 vision.
Okay, Catherine?
I say, what took him so long?
The fellow who is accused of killing Jeffrey Dahmer?
Why didn't they eliminate him faster? Look at the aggravation he caused to families. It was a heartbreak. They had to live with it.
Yes. Charles?
I agree with Ruth. You know, it took too much time. They should get the red tape. You do something like that, you do the crime, you got to do the time. Whether it's tough time or whether you get a smack on the wrist. You know, you doing the crime.
Now, several people in our audience, that I've got to tell you, Charles, Catherine, Ruth, that is the predominant feeling of folks in our audience. But Patrick is there arguing, wait a minute, nobody has the right to take a life. It's in God's hands. That's the way it is designed, no matter how angry or how upset. So it brings us back to the issue that we're talking about, prison safety. How much do we as a society have a responsibility to keep the prisoners who are locked up behind bars in prisons safe? A woman who came face to face with criminals every day for years says our prison system does absolutely enough, sometimes way too much, to provide for criminals inside prison. Retired Dade County, Florida Judge Ellen Morphonios, is that it?
It's a long Greek name. You get used to it.
People in prison today are there for non-violent offenses, people who have not committed violent acts. So we want to look at the larger picture. There are two answers. One is the law says we have an obligation to protect. We take away people's ability to protect themselves. The Supreme Court of the United States just this year said that society has an obligation to protect people in prison. And secondly, it's in our interest. Most of these people are going to be coming out. We don't want them to be brutalized. We don't want them to be filled with hate. We want them to be less susceptible to violence when they come out.
Alvin, we're going to be getting to that point in further detail in just a moment. But first, I want to go back to Ellen and find out from you. You say that the level of protection right now is just about right. So does that mean that you think Jeffrey Dahmer got what he deserved?
Those are two different questions. However, as far as the prison system, I think that the government does everything that it possibly can to protect the persons who have been convicted and sentenced to state and federal prison sentences. Government cannot be an absolute insurer of the safety of those who are in prison. Bad people are locked up in prison. It's a dangerous place. It's a dangerous place on the outside because of the bad people that aren't locked up. As to whether Jeffrey Dahmer got what he deserved, well, from a personal standpoint, it sounds like he just might have, but from a legal standpoint, of course not. He wasn't sentenced to death. He got death.
Mm-hmm. Alvin, to you, the level of protection, the average yearly cost for a stay in prison is, oh, wait a minute, Charles, what are you saying? What?
I don't agree with her. I'm not a bad person. I committed a crime. I made a mistake. I was 17 years old. I paid for that mistake. Am I a bad person today? I make $40,000 a year. I live in a brand new house. I have a wife. I have a family. I have people who take care of me. I'm not a bad person. When I came out of there, I wasn't a bad person. I took the opportunity of the prison system to make something of myself.
And Ellen, let me point out to you that Charles served 5 years for armed robbery. What do you have to say to his comments?
Armed robbery generally indicates that a weapon was involved, a pistol, that a pistol was put to somebody's head and they were offered the opportunity to give up their money or to give up their life. Now, perhaps he's a good person now. I don't quarrel with that. But frankly, I don't have a whole lot of use for armed robbers at the time they're committing armed robberies. I think they ought to be locked up as he was.
I agree that I should have been locked up. I don't agree that I should be locked up for 5 years. I didn't agree that another individual, which happened to be in the same town that I'm from, committed a murder. As far as I'm concerned, he killed someone, he took someone's life, but he walked out in 4 years and 6 months.
Okay.
Now,
We are talking about prison violence and prison safety. Do prisoners have a right to expect a certain level of safety? Dennis, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, she said that there's a lot of bad people in jail, and that, you know, that's where the society sends bad people. But it seems at the same time that these bad people that are in jail are actually acting like the judge and jury in this case and serving justice. And it just scares me that
Dennis, that's a very good point. We are going to discuss that and more on the issue of what level of safety do prisoners have a right to expect in our society. We'll take a break. Back after this. Conversation on CompuServe, faxes, phone calls. Raymond from New York, if you're still there, we're going to get to you in the next block. This fax from Jerry in California. This is not the first prison killing. The only reason we're hearing so much about it is because the victim was Jeffrey Dahmer. I suppose you could call it the ultimate in prisoner rehabilitation. And then Eddie in Ohio sent us this fax. He said he wants to know what will happen to the prisoner who killed Dahmer. We're going to try and answer that question and have much more. We are talking today about prison safety. Call us, fax us, or go online via CompuServe. We'll have more right after this.
You can access TalkBack Live with your personal computer.
Here say that this was sweet justice from Kelly in California. This is equal justice. Dahmer deserved a hard death, not life in prison. The prisoner who killed him did what our justice system refused to do. Judge, that's not unlike the point that you were making earlier. It did happen outside of the criminal justice system. A lot of people, including Eddie in Ohio, are curious what's going to happen to the prisoner if convicted who is accused of killing Jeffrey Dahmer. What would happen to him?
Prove he did it.
Right, okay, but let's just, for argument's sake, for example, if you are in prison and you are serving, say, several consecutive life sentences, what can they do to you? I mean, you're already in there, you're not going to get out.
Well, you're in a state in Wisconsin that doesn't have a death penalty, so obviously he really hasn't got anything to lose. He kills 1, he gets life. If he kills 4, he gets life. If he kills 14, he gets life. That says something about our system of justice, that there should be some corrections there. As to what happens to him, I sincerely doubt you would be able to get a jury that would say guilty. I think you would have at least one holdout who would say, no, I'm not going to vote that way.
Okay. John, you've got a comment?
I got a question for the judge. What basic rights are prisoners entitled to? I mean, other than colored television, tennis courts, and stuff like that, and weight rooms. You know,
well,
I mean, what rights are they entitled to?
Every area, we must always treat prisoners humanely. They have to be housed in good housing. They have to be fed nutritional food. They have to be clothed and heated and taken care of. That's the humane thing to do. We would be less of a person if we did anything different. We'd be going back into the age-old times when we tortured people. We don't do that anymore, nor should we ever.
Okay,
but we
outside
don't have to
of
provide them with a hotel.
But outside of that basic level of protection, how much protection in terms of physical safety against violence should be provided? For that, I want to turn to Russ in Illinois. Russ joins us on the phone. Russ, I understand that you're a prison guard.
Yes, ma'am. I'm a correctional officer in Illinois at a maximum security prison. All I have to say is, honestly, I would assume that the Wisconsin officers there did the very best they could. In our situation here in Illinois, we don't carry any weapons on the gallery at all. And a lot of times, even in a maximum security institution, we're pretty much surrounded at times by anywhere from 50 to 100 inmates. And again, we have no weapons.
we were hearing earlier from Robert Ressler, former FBI agent, criminologist, about the hierarchy of prisons, and certain prisoners are, by definition, at perhaps higher risk. For the judge and then also for Russ, was it wise to let Jeffrey Dahmer have more freedom? Russ, why don't you go first? You deal with this every day.
Again, since their state does not have a death penalty, he probably was allowed to enter the general population area.
Yes, he was.
And
was that wise, though?
They have no choice. They have to abide by the state law. Did they have any legal precedence to?
He was under protective custody for a year. He indicated he wanted to get into the general population.
Again, protective custody is at the choice mostly of the inmate. We cannot force anyone into protective custody. They can request it, and then we, of course, have to allow that if they request it.
Okay.
But if an inmate is nonviolent and we don't have to put him in a segregation area to protect others, and he requests to go back in the general population, unless Wisconsin law, again, is different.
Russ, thank you very much for your insight on this. Thanks for calling in. Judge, do you agree? Was it wise to let Dahmer into the general population?
I agree that he had a right to be there if he wanted to be there. And it sounded to me like, from what the reports are, that he and two other persons also accused of murder were on a detail cleaning the latrine or whatever it was they were doing. This is keeping them together. They aren't putting them out in the general population where some wacko can kill them.
Okay, we're talking about safety of prisoners, safety behind bars. Corey, you were making a very good point during the break.
Oh, my feeling is, if a prisoner, be it violent or non-violent, why should they be safer in prison than I am in my own home? I don't have anyone guarding me at home. If I want to provide protection, I have to buy a security system. So why should they be safer than myself?
Alvin, I want you to address that.
Because a prisoner cannot buy a security system, you see. When we take a prisoner into our custody, we control his or her life. We make all the decisions on how that person lives. We have an obligation, therefore, to protect them because they cannot protect themselves as you can on the outside. I mean, a prison, it's a difficult job, but they have two primary obligations. One is to keep people in prison and out of society, and second, to protect them while they're in prison.
Raymond in New York joins us on the phone. Raymond, go ahead. Quick comment from you, please.
Yes, I would say that Mr. Dahmer got everything he deserved. The only thing is that our taxpayers spent too much money prosecuting him. And could I make one quick comment on yesterday?
Actually, Raymond, what we're talking about today is safety in prisons. But Catherine was listening to you saying that. Thanks for calling, by the way. She's also from New York. And you were sitting there saying, yeah, I agree with Raymond.
Who's going to pay for all this?
Yeah. Okay. Well, all right, that brings up the issue, Alvin. If we beef up security, who pays for it? William?
It's a moral issue. It's not a financial issue. I mean, sure, it's a financial issue because we all have to pay for it. But the morals are more important.
We could say...
Okay, are the morals more important? We'll answer...
What he got. He deserved it. But we're a nation of laws. We have a constitution that protects against this. The people of Wisconsin voted not to have a death penalty. They voted this. So they have a right to expect that when they sentence a man to prison for life, he's going to be there for life.
Okay. William, that's a very good point, and we are talking about why we should care what happens to people in prison. We're going to be answering more questions right after this.
Do you want the inmates executing other inmates on their whims? And that's really the question. It's not really, it's a bigger issue than Jeff's death right now. The bigger issue is how did this happen? It shouldn't happen. And you can't have executions in prisons because one guy thinks it's the right thing to do.
Maybe not executions in prison, but Corey, you're from California, and you are really fed up with crime. And what were you saying about the prison experience?
I think it should be the worst nightmare you could possibly have in your life. If you're concerned about it once you get in jail, well, you should have thought about it before you committed the crime.
William?
What crime? Writing a bad check, you go to jail? I mean, for violent crime, sure.
After writing a bad check,
People are in jail for writing bad checks, believe it or not.
The point that William was making
I've got a
earlier
brother.
was, what about
I've got a brother in a
humanity?
prison
What
system in
about
Florida for writing bad checks.
What about humanity?
Is he entitled to the same treatment as
Bob,
as a
go ahead
murderer?
and weigh in.
He's got a good point. What if a young man goes in for writing a bad check and then he gets raped? He becomes worse. And then he becomes worse, and he becomes worse. What do?
And I should also point out that Bob knows what he's talking about because he is with a prison ministry that works with inmates. So to our guests, Judge, first to you, if we condone an environment of violence within the prisons, are we making matters worse? Because the vast majority of people will be released, will go back into society. Will they become more of a threat to Corey once they're out?
Number one, we don't condone violent treatment of prisoners. I know of no area in the United States where it's condoned. The problem is we have to recognize that there are people in there who are violent, who will not abide by society's standards, and they will make a weapon. You can do everything, the administration can do everything possible, but they're going to find a spoon, they're going to find a broomstick, they're going to make a weapon out of something, and because many of them are bad, mean, violent people, there are going to be people who get hurt. There is no way that
Charles,
government can be an insurer.
A lot of those prisoners are scared for their lives. And
I'm
when
sure
you sit
they
there
are.
and you put them in there and you let them get raped and you let them get molested and you let them get beat up and you let them get abused, when they come out, they're going to be 5 times worse than what they ever came in there. And you think you had it bad when you were in there and you got out. When you get out, you're going to be so bad and you're going to be so mad at the system that you're going to go out there and commit more crimes.
Robert Ressler, what's your take on this? Do you agree?
Well, I think that, certainly prisons have to be secure areas. They have to be areas where inmates can serve out their time, rehabilitate themselves if that's possible. But the fact is there are no 100% guarantees. And I don't know of any situation anywhere in life where you have 100% guarantees. If an inmate gets killed in a penitentiary, it's unfortunate, and I think it's a issue where you have to look at the situation, try to avoid that type of thing from happening again. But there are no 100% guaranteed safe environments in a penitentiary. They're dangerous places.
Doug in Kentucky sent us this fax. He says murder's wrong and those men must be charged for their actions. But he makes the point prison officials must take some responsibility for their lack of action. Oliver, you want to comment on that?
I have a great deal of sympathy for the people that have to run these joints, these prisons. I think that the Wisconsin system is generally considered one of the better ones in the country. I think the people in charge of it are doing the best they can. The point has been made and made frequently that prisons are dangerous places. You just heard Charles really unload a moment ago and indicate what happens to people. And when you get someone like the gentleman from the prison ministries mentioned, you get a young bad check writer, let's say he breaks and enters someplace, and he goes to prison, and he gets raped, and he gets beat up. You think that's making him a better person?
Well, let's ask Corey. I mean, Corey, what do you think? You've been listening to these arguments. What do you think?
I think that so many of the prisoners, I mean, they're in there, they come back, they repeat the crime again, they go back in. It's like a revolving door.
You've said it.
It's a revolving door.
And it is and why is the American public?
Wait a minute, Charles wants to answer why. Wait a minute. Charles, yeah, why is it a revolving door?
The reason why it's a revolving door.
Go ahead.
The reason why it's a revolving door policy for everybody is because you take an inmate, you give him 25 bucks, a pair of plastic shoes, and one outfit, and you throw him in the street, and he's going right back to what he did before. You give him something like me, the Atlanta Advancement Center here in Atlanta, Georgia, where you have a man named James Doctor.
Charles, the point that Corey's making is, wait a minute, it should not be a good and pleasant, happy experience. But, yeah, Oliver, go ahead.
The point is that if you treat people like beasts, they are not going to get any better. The point has also been made that when they are released from prison with no skills, now Charles fortunately got some training in prison, but if you release somebody who's been beaten up, molested, and has no skills, and one of the stupid things that's going on now in our country is that we're actually trying to cut programs that may make prisoners better.
So Oliver, you're saying for our own personal safety as a society, we can't do what Corey is saying, just wait a minute, make it a really nasty experience. Patrick, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I mean, what I see with this lady here, I mean, I hate to point fingers, but to me, she's a white lady living in the suburbs who wants to see the whole world turn into suburbia. What we have to do is teach these people values. I mean, obviously in their family life when they was growing up, they wasn't taught values, or it was some kind of imbalance or breakdown. So what the responsibility of the government and the institution is to teach them those values, those principles, those morals, so that they could come out being the same person, being a better person.
Very good point, Patrick. We have to take a break. Final thoughts right after this. Stay with us.
I'm about to...
Tracy has been kind enough to monitor the chat going on CompuServe. Lively discussion on CompuServe also. Why don't you kind of sum up the conversation that you're getting on the forum?
Well, a lot of people had a lot to say about the Jeffrey Dahmer situation, but most of it in regards to the prisoners, most people felt that basically prison was somewhat of a too easy place to be, that they should really have to work a lot harder for what they do. They're actually maybe do some things to earn money instead of the taxpayers making everything, that they shouldn't be allowed to have their television, their weight rooms, their, you know, anything there that is like a luxury to them.
Okay, and does safety qualify as a luxury? Alvin Bronstein, I'd like to go ahead and go to you at this point, bring you back into the discussion. What do you say to the folks on CompuServe who say, wait a minute, it's a country club?
Well, it's not a country club. I don't know of a single prison in the country, and I've been in most, in hundreds and hundreds of them, that is a country club. What we have to recognize is the point that Patrick made a few moments ago, began to make. We are gutting and cutting all of the programs that will have an impact on crime in this country. Schools and social programs, we're cutting them to pour billions of dollars into prisons, which will have no impact on crime. We're wasting taxpayer money. We have to protect people when they're in prison, but that's besides the point. We have to do something about the terrible crime problem in this country, and prison is not the answer to it.
Ellen, do you buy that?
I don't buy the part that prison is not the answer to it. I think granted, the programs are good, but they sure haven't stopped the crime from building and building and building. I think it's time that we went back to basics. If you commit a violent crime, you are going to go to prison. It is not going to be a country club. You are going to be there because you did a bad thing. It's called punishment. We can't lose sight of the fact that you and I have in our locker a picture of our kids and a candy bar. Jeffrey Dahmer had in his locker the skull and genitals of one of his victims. We're not talking about church deacons that are locked up in these institutions.
Judge,
we can't make them abide to our standards.
Judge, thank you much. Robert Ressler, I want to end final thought with you. Your take on this?
Well, I think prisons, you know, you're always going to have the extremely violent offender. Dahmer certainly was one of them. There is a segment of prison populations that are totally non-rehabilitatable. They're blatant psychopaths, sexual psychopaths, homicidal personalities, and we have to deal with these people. At the same time, there are a great number of people in penitentiaries that are being held in penitentiaries too long. They could be put back into society, into halfway houses, and make them productive. We should separate the violent from the rehabilitatable.
And that is the final word. Thank you very much, Robert Ressler, Alvin Bronstein, Ellen Morphonius. Thanks to all of you, and thanks to Oliver Keller here in our studio audience for all of your insight. Quick break, back after this. With a couple of faxes, we've had a very lively conversation from Gertrude in Maine. She says, to those who say Dahmer got what he deserved, his murder freed him from punishment. And then this from John in North Carolina: prisons do not make men violent. They were violent when they got there. Do not mourn Dahmer, mourn his victims. And then from a viewer in Michigan, he says that he doesn't think that Dahmer's sentence was sufficient, but he says justice is not always fair. I must believe that Jeffrey Dahmer has now met with the ultimate judge. On that note, we thank all of the people for joining us here in our studio audience, and of all of you for joining us on TV. Thanks for your thoughts, your comments, your phone calls. And also this note for tomorrow: does the country need a co-president, and should we have that person be Hillary Rodham Clinton? Join us and let your voice be heard. Lively discussion tomorrow.